Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jennifer LaRue. I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Mark Twain House and Museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. And I couldn't be more delighted to be hosting this evening's program, talking about this incredible book, Halfway Home, with Dr. Miller and our guest, Deb. Rogala. I'm sorry, I just completely screwed up her name, but she's awesome. We just had a wonderful conversation in the green room, and I know you're all going to enjoy this very, very much. I'm not going to stay on screen too much longer because I know you're eager to hear all of them talk, or both of them talk, but I see you're already chatting away in the chat. Please continue to do that throughout the program. It's part of the fun of the virtual format, and make friends here. And know that the chat continues. This is being recorded and it's going to reside on our website. You can revisit it anytime you like just by following the same link that you used to register originally. And the chat remains live in perpetuity. So if you make a friend here or start a conversation that you want to continue, you can come back and continue it right there anytime you like. However, toward the end of our program, we are going to have a Q&A session. If you have a question for either of our speakers, rather than post it in the chat, if you would do me the favor of posting it in the Ask a Question area that you see at the bottom of your screen, that will make that part of the program go just that much more smoothly. So thank you in advance for doing that. While we're looking at that part of the screen, I'd like you to direct your attention to that long green button right above the Ask a Question area that says your donation here will be shared between the Mark Twain House, Community Partners in Action, and the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center. We three are very close friends and close partners here in the Hartford area, and we're delighted to co-host this program together this evening, and know that any donation that you are able to make this evening, big or small, will be divided between the three of us equally. So, and I do want to say on behalf of all three organizations that every penny you give us will be put to very, very good use and will be deeply, deeply appreciated. Another way you can support us, and my colleague Jacques has just reposted the link for purchasing a signed copy of Reuben Miller's book, Halfway Home, that we're going to be talking about this evening. Now, we know, we're no dummies. We know you can purchase this book elsewhere. But if you do make the purchase through us, first of all, know that you get a signed copy. And also know that your purchase benefits the Mark Twain House and Museum. And again, we appreciate that very, very much. I want to acknowledge our sponsors. Like all of our programs, our virtual programs, this evening's program is sponsored by the Wish You Well Foundation and by Connecticut Public, WNPR, our media sponsor. And we're very grateful for the production sponsorship support honoring the legacy of Frank Lord, who was a beloved trustee of ours who passed away not too long ago. And we honor his legacy through the support of these public programs. And we're very grateful for that. I want to now introduce our guests tonight. Our moderator is Deborah Rogala. She's a licensed social worker, and she's Community Partners in Action's Director of Operations. And later in the program, she's going to tell about an incident that's occurred in CPA's very recent history that might make you understand a little bit more about the kind of challenges that they face on a day-to-day basis. Reuben Miller is a sociologist, criminologist, and social worker who teaches at the University of Chicago in the School of Social Service Administration, where he studies and writes about race, democracy, and the social life of the city. He's been a member at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, a fellow at the New America Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation, and a visiting scholar at the University of Texas at Austin and Dartmouth College. A native son of Chicago, he lives with his wife and children on the city's south side. So I'd like you to join me in welcoming both Dr. Miller and Deborah to the screen. And give me just a moment to bring them on. Hello, Reuben and Deb. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having us, Jennifer, and thanks for the warm welcoming.
Yeah,
happy to have you.
So glad to be here. Fantastic.
Well, I'm going to sit back like everybody and enjoy your conversation. Can you, Deb, just let me know when you'd like me to come back up and help with the Q&A?
I certainly will. Thank you, Jennifer.
Very good. Thank you. See you in a little bit then. Have fun.
Okay.
Thanks.
So Dr. Miller, this is such an honor to be interviewing you. I do want to tell you that this is the first author that I've ever interviewed. So you should be really excited about this.
I'm very excited. And it's just wonderful to be in conversation with someone who does the work. Does the work.
For sure.
I appreciate you for that. Absolutely.
Well, thank you. And first and foremost, I want to really congratulate you on this book. I think what you've done with this book is you've brought history, right? Mm-hmm. Statistics, mm-hmm. and human being stories. Mm-hmm. And you've woven them in a way that was really powerful. And so I think for the audience out there, you have to read this book. You just have to. And so let's start with the title, because the title, I've been doing this work for 27 years, and the title really is meaningful. Can you talk to us a little bit about how the title came about and what it means to you?
Yeah, so I spent about 3.5 years moving in, through, and out of halfway houses in Chicago on the south and west side predominantly. And that was an interesting experience because the guys would go through, all manner of programming,
mm-hmm.
life skills training, interview skills. They learn how to write checkbooks, how to tie ties, how to write resumes, how to shake hands and look people directly in the eye when they talked, and all these things to build up what economists call soft skills. They're soft skills.
Yeah.
This is a form of human capital investment. So the idea is that if we prepare, for example, someone who's marginalized for the worlds of work, and for an independent life, then they'll be able to find it. Mm-hmm. But what I found was that, when they tried to go home, they got confronted with the law and policy apparatus that made it nearly impossible for them to find work, nearly impossible for them to rent an apartment. They never quite made it home. So it was interesting. It was like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. This, people are stuck.
Yeah.
You leave the prison, and maybe you make it to a halfway house if you're fortunate, if there are enough of them, if it's open, if it doesn't have a waiting list, if there's a couch for you to sleep on, if it does, maybe you'll be fortunate in that way. But also, you leave the prison hoping to experience some semblance of freedom, and what you get met with is a strange new legal reality that doesn't allow you to fully participate in the civic life, mm-hmm. culture, the labor market, the social life of the city, as it were, not even really able to participate fully with your family. And so Halfway Home is both, in some ways, an homage to the important work that folks at halfway houses do, for sure, where people meet in the middle,
Yep.
But it's also sort of a statement of fact, people aren't allowed to ever go home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, thank you for that. We live in a pretty judgmental society, right? Absolutely. And I think what screamed at me throughout the book was when we look at any individual, any human being that is incarcerated, it's really the only population that we can openly discriminate against.
Yeah.
And it's okay, right?
Yeah.
And so that's powerful that this could just happen and everybody's okay with it. And I'm not saying everybody is, but it feels like everybody is. So can you talk to us a little bit about specific ways that we as a society discriminate against an individual that is coming out, that served their time, right? Yeah. That we hold that crime against them for the rest of their life. And that's where you talk about halfway home, never really ever home.
Absolutely. I mean, so if we think about the process, so someone goes to jail or prison, and they may have been gone for a decade. They may have been gone for several months. Mm-hmm. They have been gone for a decade or more. So they've done their time, whatever the sentence is. That sentence is over.
Yeah.
And then they come home and they leave the prison gate and they're handed gate money, which ranges from, $25 to $50 to a couple hundred if you're in a state that and you're in one of those fortunate states where they think about things a little further than the meal that you buy,
Right.
So you get handed this gate money, you might get a bus ticket or a train ticket, and then you're sent on your way. You got to report to your probation or parole officer. But the thing that you're greeted with, even before you meet your family, are over 44,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that target you and only you, that target people with criminal records. These what we call the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction range from employment regulations to housing regulations to regulations on civic participation, to just count them, for example. There are over 19,000 laws, policies, and administrative sanctions that prevent people from fully accessing the labor market when they get out. 19,000. In my state, the state of Illinois, it's ridiculous. In my state, the state of Illinois, there are over 500. And if you count access to business licenses and property rights as a part of the ways that people, do things like entrepreneurship or like, you can hang your own shingle or skilled work, that figure goes from 500 to well over 900 laws that target people with criminal records and only them. There are over 1,000 housing restrictions, making it nearly impossible for people to rent apartments. In fact, in 1996, there was something called the one strike rule that the Department of Housing and Urban Development initiated after a State of the Union address from then President Bill Clinton. Now, there was already a law in the books in 1988, the Drug Abuse Act in 1988. But the one strike rule said that anyone who's been convicted of a crime at any time in their life, and anyone who even passes through the doors of a public housing a HUD-sponsored apartment, if they have a criminal record, they can be evicted. And not only them, but the person who has, quote, control of the unit. So the person who is leasing the apartment can be evicted too. And so overnight, grandmothers were being evicted for letting their grandchildren sleep.
Yeah.
Overnight, literally the same year, within 3 months, or I'm sorry, 6 months of the not the passage, because there was a suite of laws that legislation that passed after that, but after that State of the Union address, within 6 months of the address itself, the number of denials in public housing based on a criminal record doubled. And the number of evictions had already increased 6 months after the address, before any new legislation even hit the books. And so these are the legal ways that we make it so that people literally don't have a home, right? Like quite literally. This is why it's unsurprising now that when we read from the Prison Policy Institute's, a very recent report from them, that people with criminal records are something like 7 times more likely to experience homelessness. And if you've been homeless, you're more likely to be arrested multiple times. Right. So what we've done is we've pushed people out as a function of housing policy in this example, but a function of employment policy, a function of how we think about justice in this country.
And then we also take the family that's trying to be supportive, and we remove their housing.
We remove their housing, making it
right.
So now I'm interfering with the family dynamic.
Right.
Because my grandmother wanted to let me stay, you see, if I have a criminal record. She loves me. I'm her baby.
She raised you.
She raised me.
In your situation, she did.
In my situation, she did. Many Black households, grandmothers are important anyway, right? Like grandmothers.
Right.
Grandmothers.
I agree.
Grandmothers are the goats, right? Our grandmothers.
Don't mess with your grandmother. Yeah.
Don't mess with grandmas.
Yeah.
They're evicting grandmas.
Yeah.
They're evicting grandmas. And so now the relationship between a grandmother and her grandchild now looks different, because what I've done is I've introduced a dynamic that wasn't there before. I've now made it a hazard for her to help me.
Right.
So now what happens when she helps me, because she's going to do what grandma's going to do, and I don't straighten my room,
Yeah.
When I don't come home when I was supposed to, when I don't listen, like, because I'm a hardhead, because I'm young, or maybe I'm old and hard-headed, or whatever the situation is, it introduces a power dynamic that wasn't there before. It changes the very nature of the relationship. It introduces a tension that I don't think that we really have accounted for. It's a part of what I was trying to do in the book, is really think about, how mass incarceration has changed even the most intimate parts of our lives.
Right. So I don't know if you knew this, but I have the power to give you a magic wand, right? And let's talk about that for a minute. So when you talk about those 45,000 laws, if you could just talk to us about 3 that you would change today, that would make an incredible impact in the lives of people coming out and their families. Could you select? I know that would be really hard to do, but could you select 3?
Yeah. I will. Yes, I will. So the 3 that I would select. One would be the restrictions on the ability of people with records to sit on juries.
Okay.
That's a major one, which would, in my mind, help ensure what that does is it helps ensure that people with records are never judged by a jury of their peers, because there's never anybody on the other side of that court box who knows what it means to pull their life back together from a situation like they faced.
Right.
So that would be important for me. The second thing I would do is that I would get rid of the rule that says that I would get rid of the rule that requires the termination of parental rights after 15 months. So I'm just picking stuff out of my head right now, right? So this is a tough question. But what was enacted through the Adoption and Safe Families Act was a sort of a policy maneuver that said once you've been incarcerated for 15 months, and we know that the average prison sentence in this country is like just over 2 years. Yep. But once you've been incarcerated for 15 months, the state must automatically begin proceedings to terminate your rights, your parental rights. And so as a result, we've seen tens of thousands of families separated from their children. Now, this isn't the rule that's going to impact the most people, but for me, it is gut wrenching. It is important, and it sends a signal. So I would eliminate that.
Well, I do think it's important to also share what's in your book is that for many of these parents, they didn't even know that their rights were being terminated. They got a letter while they were incarcerated indicating that they no longer have the parental right of their child. And that's so right. That was gut wrenching to read that.
It is family separation as public policy.
Yep.
And I thank you so much for your careful read and just engage in the book. If I were to pick a third thing, it really isn't striking a law. It would be encouraging a move that I've seen happen across many states, which would be the automatic sealing of records after a period of time. I think that's a feasible thing. I think it's the kind of thing that, even though I think records, probably we shouldn't be able to access records. So there's certain kind of records that maybe we could have an argument for, but there's moves to seal or expunge records after, say, 7 years or something like that, after someone's been clean for 7 years. They call these clean slate laws, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and we've seen this happen across many states. I would strongly encourage that. If I could have a fourth, what I would do.
You were only allowed 3. But you know what? Tonight we're gonna go crazy. I'm gonna give you 4.
The wine gives me one more wish.
Yeah, totally.
If I had a fourth, I would automatically seal juvenile records, and the reason for this is because habituation or the idea of a repeat offense is often used against people to stack the sentences they use. So if you've been arrested, like one guy in my book he was homeless for 10 years and really was homeless beginning as a child, but he'd been arrested like 14 times or so over the course of that. So by the time he finally gets arrested for having 3 crack rocks in his pocket, because he's homeless and he's using, and these things go together, I think, in powerful ways. The prosecutor uses his 14 prior arrests as evidence of his criminality. And so what would have been a 1 to 3 year sentence that he could have probably rolled out in jail, which jail is not an easy place by any stretch of the imagination. We all know that. became a 3 to 5 year sentence.
Yeah.
That he had to fight. I would seal juvenile records, and then a fifth thing, I would end the situation.
Let's just make it 10. You got 10 things. Come on, let's keep it going. So the other piece is, that definition of citizenship that you talk about in your book. Talk to us a little bit about that, and the feeling of belonging, because that was really powerful too. There's so many powerful things, and I don't even know that we're going to ask the audience any questions, because I have at least 40 for you. So talk to us a little bit about that citizenship and the power of that, and that came throughout your book a lot.
I appreciate it. One of the problems I feel in the way we approach this problem is the problem in how we approach it is where we think the intervention should happen, and we think the intervention should happen at the level of behavior, because we think that crime and punishment, we think that punishment is directly related to crime, which any student of criminal justice statistics will tell you that it's just not. There's not a direct relationship between crime and punishment. There's just not. In years where crimes have been down, incarcerations have been up, and in years where incarceration has been up, the number of and the inverse has been true. In places where they administered harsher punishments, there was more crime. In places where they administered softer punishments, there was less crime. In places, and the inverse was also true. And so it's and also in different countries. So Canada and we had a prison boom at a time when Canada didn't. We had a crime wave when they didn't. We did different things than they did. Our crime decline when we got a crime decline. It happened at the same time despite our approach. And so it's not clear that for anybody who studies this that crime and punishment are linked. In fact, we think it's not. So that's right. One. And so if crime and punishment are linked, then it raises questions about criminal behavior. And so we're trying to intervene in the things that people do because we think it's going to close the spigot for the number of people who get sent into the prison. But Black Americans, for example, are twice as likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. They're 5 times more likely to be incarcerated, do longer sentences for the same crimes. And so that's one example. Indigenous Americans, indigenous folks have it way worse, in fact, than even Black people in this country when it comes to arrest and incarceration. And these are just 2 examples. So we know that this relationship isn't quite clear. And so what we do is we try to teach people how to be better people. And I think some folks need that. I don't think that that's not true. I think people engage in crime. I think people have caused harm to other people in many instances. But because these things aren't directly linked, you can help people become better people all you want, and the prison population doesn't shrink.
Right.
It doesn't shrink because mass incarceration isn't about criminal behavior. Mass incarceration is about our relationship to the polity, meaning our status as citizens, meaning my relationship not just to some nebulous state, some giant word, but to each other. Mass incarceration is about citizenship because citizenship, at the end of the day, is about belonging. Yeah. In one instance, we think about citizenship as legal status, but citizenship means nothing if I can't go to the store, if I can't rent an apartment, if I can't sit on a jury, if I can't engage civically in ways that I find meaningful. Then my citizenship doesn't mean much. Right. Citizenship is about belonging, in this case, to a political community. But what we need to think also about is what does it mean to belong to a human community? So the intervention has to be at that level, at the level of belonging, where we think about what would it look like for someone to be able to fully participate in our society because they play a role in it already, because they're human beings and they deserve a place in society as human beings. Right. So this is so what I'm trying to do in this moment is really sort of raise the place at which we intervene, not raise our thoughts, but think about this think the scale is much bigger than the way we've perceived of it, and the way we try to tackle it. And so I think that we've made a world in which people don't belong, in which we force people to the margins. And I think we in our thinking about how to undo it, we have to commit to belonging. That's what I think.
Right. And I would agree. And I think when you humanize people through your stories, whether it was Ronald or Yvette or your brother, right, that brings it real for people. And I think that process that you did in your book was really powerful. You also, I think this was very purposeful, is you selected language throughout your book. Person first language, which I think is really important. But the word cage that you use throughout to describe where people are held. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in many ways just building on important decisions that other scholars and other, people who love other human beings have used. And so to think about the prison as a cage, I think draws attention to the conditions in which people live in a way that talking about the prison as a cell or even as a prison doesn't quite do, for two reasons. One, because prisons are over there somewhere. There's some prisons within city limits, for example. Some people live in towns around prisons. But for most people in the country, prisons are remote places, off in the distance, where whatever happens over there to those people just happens. It's out of sight, out of mind. In fact, even when prisons are close. So, for example, there's a prison. I used to teach at the University of Michigan. I lived in Ann Arbor, and there was a prison, a women's prison, right outside of city limits in a town called Ypsilanti, which is literally, a few miles away. And no one talks about it. No one thinks about it. No one thinks about those women. No one thinks about their lives. No one thinks about what it means when they come home. The connection between the homeless encampments that are in every one of our even most progressive small cities, right around the latte shops. There's almost always a homeless encampment. There's always some wonderful priest who lets people park, pitch a tent in the parking lot or allows them to sleep on the church floor or something like that. The connection between that and the apparatus that holds them is broken. We don't think about the women. We don't think about the women in Ann Arbor. Many people did, of course, but I'm saying, like, is the general, the general scene of the town, quite think about them in that way. Until there was a lot of activism, agitation, and until we started forcing, we, meaning people who care about this question, started forcing folks to wrestle with the reality of how women are made to live. And so, and not just women, incarcerated men too, in the state of Michigan. And so then folks start getting active, and then you start seeing things like people getting hired. So anyway, I think so on the one hand, it brings the contradiction of putting a person in these conditions to light, and on the other, I think it's accurate. I think it's an accurate description of where and how people live. I think folks do live in cages. I think there are cages. There are holding pens, and what is solitary confinement but a cage? What is this? But that's just one vision of it. So I use person-centered language, and I use language like a cage, and I use language to describe, for example, the incarceration of parents, is family separation, because I think it's accurate. I think that's what it is. And
I think when you hear the word cage, I think everybody in the audience out there thinks of a certain thing, and to think that there's a human being in that cage, I think it was the right word.
I appreciate that.
I think it was the right word because it was so powerful. And every time you used it, it made me reflect on, wow. And, we've been doing this work for a long time, but what your book did for me is reflect on the work in a different way. And what else could we be doing, right? And you talked about being close to the problem in order to be able to really help the problem, right? Proximity.
Yeah.
And when we're so far removed, we have very little understanding.
It's interesting, so Yeah, absolutely. We have to get close to the people. And if we take an audit, we really are close to the people. But for some reason, we don't make the connection to make this point. 1 in 2 American families has a loved one that's been to a jail or prison.
Yeah.
That's the most recent stat. Half of us have a loved one that's been to a jail or prison. 1 in 8 white women in this country has a loved one who's right now sitting in one of those cages. That is today. 1 in 8 white women.
Right.
1 in 2 black women, because this is how racism works, right? Like one way that racism works,
Yeah.
But 1 in 8 white women. That's get 10 friends and or get 8 friends, have a dinner party, and one of those folks has a loved one sitting in a jail cell or a prison cell right now.
Right.
38% of white American men, but I should really say boys, because of when this happens, will be arrested before they turn 23 years old for some reason other than a traffic violation. So this is a ubiquitous American experience, but we've learned to distance ourselves from it.
Yeah.
We've done this strange magic where
White people don't go to prison.
White people don't go to prison.
Right?
1 million white people in prison.
Yeah.
But prison, when Trump, to name the guy, when he says what have you done, he talks about criminal justice reform as being for the blacks. That's what he right. Like, what I did for you was criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
You did that for me? Like that? Like thank you,
Trump. Really, thank you.
The collective black family is just sighing a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
That criminal justice is the first step that has happened. but the point is the same. It's that this is how racism works. Racism has not separated white children, white people from their innocence. It has separated black folks from their innocence quite effectively. So much so that folks when polled think that black boys are 4 years older when they look at them. But when polled, they consider black boys more guilty. When polled, death panel jurists think that folks that we identify as Latinos are more dangerous. And when studied, Latinos get the death penalty more often. It's not surprising. So it's like this trick is the trick that we've done is we've associated danger with the groups that we've racialized in particular ways, especially black boys and men. And so we miss how mass incarceration is murdering us all. We miss the work that it's doing. Rural incarceration rates are exceeding rates in the city.
Yeah.
Poverty is now concentrated in the suburbs, not the city. Our stuff is all off. This is what I'm trying to say. And we need to reckon. So we need to reckon with that, which means that I have to take account. I have to take account of my proximity to this question. And when I do that, I start to see things differently. I start to understand things differently. Yeah.
Well, and when you even bring, addiction and mental health into it, often when I will talk to people, I'll say, so how many people have a relative or a friend that has an issue with addiction? Because I don't know anybody in my life that addiction and mental health hasn't negatively impacted their life.
Interesting.
And that's the population that we incarcerate.
That's right. That's right.
And so people have got to be able to relate to the issue in a way that makes it real for them. We want to, as a society, put people in their little boxes, and all the, incarcerated people are over here, and all the white people are over here, and all the black people are over here, and it doesn't work.
It doesn't work. It's not. Yeah. It is not honest.
Right.
It is. That's in my mind. This is one way that racism works. One way that racism works is that we are convinced that the systems that we build to contain, confine, define, limit the lives and experiences of one group don't affect us.
Yeah.
Whoever the us is,
right.
Cut these out groups and whatever happens to them is okay. And I'm afraid of them, so I write 45,000 laws. Right. I'm afraid of them, so I exclude them from work. I'm afraid of them, so I do all this work. It affects us all. It affects us all. And it makes the world less safe and more dangerous as well.
Right. But if we turn it every time an individual succeeds when they come out, that affects us positively.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the impact can be so great. You know, there's a smart justice group in Connecticut, and they're awesome, and they've changed laws, and their slogan is nothing about us without us.
Yeah, I love that.
And that's so powerful, right?
Yeah.
You know, you have people making laws that I feel like they know what they're doing, but they're creating bigger problems.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
The point about nothing about us without us also relates to the question of proximity and how we embrace it in our own lives.
Yeah.
I mean, on the one hand, you know, we can all be sympathetic toward any social group. I mean, you know, as you know, write about my brother who gets locked up, you know, this kind of thing. And we could wait on personal experience and some way to sort of weigh in. I would argue most of us have that. We just haven't looked up, you know, we've found a way to separate ourselves from it. And your point about thinking about, for example, addiction and how addiction works and our families is a great way to build that connection. But the other thing is the other part of belonging, this thing that I think is important, a commitment that we have to make one to another, that we produce a world in which we all belong, even when we make mistakes, even when perhaps someone has caused harm. I think that's the real ethical test, actually, when someone gives you reason to be afraid of them, how do you treat them? You know, but this is a different question. But how do we incorporate? How do we bring in people with records, with criminal histories, maybe even people who've engaged in harm? And I think the test is whether or not we bring them in as, you know, wide-eyed puppies that we pat on the head and, you know, traipse out when we're fundraising, or who we, you know, treat as charity, as cases for charity, or whether we allow them to fully participate in the social worlds that we've created for ourselves. Do we allow them leadership positions? Nothing for us without us.
Right.
You know, are they not just at the table? Are they setting the agenda? You know, are they a part of the agenda setting process? Are they in leadership? Are they allowed to fully participate in ways that we would find meaningful? That for us is the real test. Not just do I allow you to have a job at McDonald's. There's nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, you know, but that's the horizon for some people and not most. Right. You know, but can you have leadership in, say, a nonprofit, a corporate entity, a company, in the making of the city, as it were?
Right.
You know, are you allowed to make the city? That's the question of our time, I think.
Well, absolutely. And, you know, there are a lot of nonprofits in the Hartford community, and some individuals will say that, you know, we're going to help an individual get a job at a variety of places, but we're not going to hire that individual ourselves.
That's right.
That's a major contradiction, right? You know, I've been working for CPA for 27 years, and I proudly say that we are one of those agencies that says you can work for us as well.
That's fantastic.
Right?
Exactly. It's exactly.
Yeah. So remember when we were in the green room and Jennifer said I had to welcome her back in? I think that's the time of the show where the audience gets to ask you questions. So Jennifer, you're back.
Well, I'm not sure anybody's too happy to see me here because I know people I've been absolutely riveted, and I cannot tell you, for such a serious and important topic, you both have made me laugh so many times. It's been such a cheerful and upbeat conversation. So delightful. So thank you both. And we do have some really good questions from the audience. But before we get to those, Deb, can you share with us a little bit about what's happened with CPA in Hartford here in the past couple of days, and the challenge that you've been faced with, and the 38 people that you've had to help in this special way?
For those of you that saw the news or have read the newspaper. CPA has a 2 residential programs at our Washington Street complex, and unfortunately, we experienced an electrical fire underneath the ground that affected the building, and we had to place 38 individuals, human beings, into an alternative situation for a few days. Fortunately, we have half of them that are back at our program and are thrilled to be back at our program. We hope the others will return next week. But a huge shout out to staff and to our residents, because they were phenomenal through this process. And when you think about what could have happened, it didn't. We all stuck together. We came together. We got through it. And I'm really proud of our staff, and I'm really proud of all of our residents.
Well,
yeah.
Congratulations. And that's, and I wanted you to talk about that, because we tend, those of us who are kind of outside the system and standing back observing from afar, tend to think of it as kind of a routine. Okay, here's what they do every day. But no, here's this huge curveball that was thrown to you, and you handled it with such a plum. And I think that, as my colleague Jacques Lamar has pointed out in the chat, that Mark Twain was kind of one of the founders of what turned into.
He was one of our original board members.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty cool, right?
Very cool.
Yeah. He would have been really proud. So, having said that, let me go to the audience questions. Margaret Levy wants to know, is the 15-month rule for termination of parental rights a federal rule or an Illinois rule or whatever?
Yeah, it was a federal guideline that was introduced to the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And so what it does is it sets the sort of outer limit. So 15 months is the last moment at which termination of family rights should begin per this federal guideline. In some states, they take this up much sooner. So some states have started proceedings as early as 6 months of incarceration. I mean, and in 6 months, you're just getting used to being in prison. And so they're varied times that happen. This is one example of an initiative that someone was hoping, like a well-meaning move that had consequences that weren't sort of thought through for this group, because this group isn't considered. So what was happening was children were aging out of foster care. And so aging out means they stayed in foster care. They weren't placed permanently in a home. They weren't reunified with their family. And these children were hard children to place. I mean, these were overwhelmingly Black children, because Black children are, overwhelmingly, disproportionately placed in foster care in our country. But these were also disabled children, children who struggle with mental and physical disabilities. And these were children that were not only hard to place in foster care, but exceptionally hard to place for adoptions. And so the Adoption and Safe Family Act was trying to increase the number of adoptions and reduce the barriers that would allow families to come take these children into their homes permanently. This, I thought, was quite well-meaning, beautiful, really.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're trying to care for orphans. This is effectively orphans, right? And so I myself was in foster care, so I have a soft spot for this kind of thinking. And anyway, but the long story short, but because we're not considering how we do that, and we're certainly not considering the expense of the families from which these folks come from when they have criminal records, because we're not viewing people with criminal records as fully human beings, you see. Mm-hmm. Then we say, what we'll do is we'll initiate this rule where we can increase the number of adoptions, which happened, by the way, over 1 million adoptions over the next, say, decade or two, as I think is a direct result of this law. Mm-hmm. And tens of thousands of families that lost the right to access their children, some of whom never even knew.
Right.
Some of whom never even knew.
Yeah.
Wow. So Janet wants to know, how hard is it to reduce the prison population, given the fact that many vendors have a stake in providing services and products to prisons? I suspect they have strong lobbies. Plus, communities need the jobs that prisons provide. I think that's a fascinating question, Janet. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have two responses to it. So one, absolutely, that I think that is absolutely the case. So if we think about prison privatization, the discussion usually goes toward private prisons themselves. And so, and so we celebrate, for example, when, the federal government says no more private prisons. We're gonna eliminate this because, private prisons in our country happen in ways that are, you know, when you privatize punishment in this country, it happens in ways that typically don't work out very well. In other places, private prisons aren't often the worst places. So, for example, in the UK, private prisons in the UK aren't worse necessarily than the prisons that are funded. But anyway, we're not the UK, right? We're the US, and so our private prisons tend to be egregious. Having said that, when we think about privatization, we typically think about prisons. We don't think about things like ancillary services that operate in every single prison. And so, telecommunication services, for example, I used to have to send messages. I would send emails through a company called JPay that would charge me 20 cents a page to send an email to my brother who was locked away. I'd put trust funds. I'd put money on his books through a quote trust fund deposit that was handled through another telecommunication service. In this case, it was called Connect Network because he was incarcerated in Michigan.
And only how much of that actually went to your brother?
Well, this is a trip. So everything over half of everything over $50, we're going to have to pay for state legal fees. Yeah. Another interesting thought about how money is exchanged or not. But a phone call, which is ostensibly free if you have a cell phone service, it's the cost of the contract, was $6.95, and this was after a series of reforms in the state of Michigan to reduce the cost. So this is about 15 years of fighting to get the cost down from about $15 to $20 to $7 a phone call. And so these costs are all these are all run by profit driven entities. In this case, telecommunication services, and then they're also just folks who provide food services. So it's not just the evil, giant prison, private prison investing company. It's Sodexo, it's Aramark that provides food for prisoners on the inside, and so there are a lot of interesting interests that converge. And this point about prisons. Prison guards, prisons being sources of work for small towns. This is absolutely the case. A dear friend of mine, John Eason, he's a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, did a study where he found that a prison in a prison town raises the median income by $400 in that town. And that might not seem like a lot to a lot of folks on this call, but $400 goes a long way. But it's the kind of money that you might not see in your paycheck, you might feel though, even, right? Like you feel a little different when you have an extra $400 or so in your account. Anyway, there are many ways that profit, that money is made and changes hands in these spaces, and it does complicate reform efforts because all these folks have lobbies and lobbyists, and that's absolutely true. And it's one of the reasons why we have to really think about what it means to be in prison, what the experience is like, and it's why we have to get close so we understand all these different points.
Yeah, and the impact, and that's why your conversations with individuals that have experienced it and people that were visiting their loved ones and you visiting your loved one, that's what I think you'll find in this book, or I know you'll find in this book, is that it's amazing how you bring it all together. And so we've got to read this book. Everybody out there, you got to make a promise. Dr. Miller is listening right now.
And we do have some other questions, but I wanted to say, so we were talking about statistics about how many disproportionately, how many Black people and families are know somebody or have a family member who's been incarcerated versus a white woman such as myself. And I'm trying to think, I think I had a kind of distant relative who was incarcerated once, but I don't really know about it. My question is, how do you get people like me who are perhaps in a position of more power politically and able to speak and advocate more easily to engage in this really important societal issue. Whereas, the people who are experiencing it firsthand might not have the tools or the access or the megaphone that the others of us have.
I have some thoughts, but Deb, I'd love to hear, because this is something I'm sure that you do with like board members and sort of publicity campaigns to get the word out about things that you've been doing. So, for example, stuff around the arts, stuff the fact that you're providing this wonderful housing. I mean, I'd love to hear any thoughts that you have too.
Yeah, I think that the first thing is we've got to recognize that anybody that has been incarcerated, anybody that has committed a crime is a human being. And you've got to really work through that yourself and open your heart to that idea. We have some amazing programs. We have an art exhibit right now with over 700 pieces of artwork that are done by artists, right, who are incarcerated. But they're artists first. Their incarceration is secondary to who they are as an individual. And I think we've got to really wrap our heads around that and understand that I feel like laws are made for a reason. And that, you also, I saw another interview with you, Dr. Miller, is talking about people voting and the importance of getting out there and vote, and not just in the big elections, but the small elections, because what happens in your town is so critical to what's happening in the entire state of Connecticut. Fortunately, we live in a state where the incarceration rate has gone down a lot. When I first started, the incarceration rate for Connecticut was over 20,000 individuals incarcerated. Now we're down to roughly 15. The female population was almost 15,000. We're down to about 500. So those are all really good things. And I think, CPA's relationship with Department of Correction makes that happen. You have to have a relationship with the correctional facilities in order to connect with the people that are in there. But treating people like human beings is number one.
I appreciate that point so much. And the only thing I would add to that is to enhance it would be right. And people are full of contradictions. You love your Uncle Lenny, who's got all kinds of problems, and he's so great at the party, and you love hanging out with him. You love spending time with him. He's your uncle. This is your uncle, cousin, brother, sister, father, mother, friend, neighbor.
Yeah.
There's no difference. They just made some mistakes. They made some mistakes. And Ronald Simpson Bay, whose ears burn every time I get a chance to talk about this book. He's my dear friend, and he's a powerful guy. And anyway, he did 27 years on a wrongful conviction. But one of the things that he says, who doesn't want a second chance? Who doesn't deserve a second chance? We've all made mistakes. It just is what it is. The question is, should punishment be for a lifetime? And once I make the ethical decision that it should not be, once I come to that place, well, now I've got a different set of decisions to make about how I carry on in my life.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for that point to be a reminder that these are human beings. And they belong to us. Yeah. It's not just someone off in the distance. I mean, for some people it will be, but for most of us, it's not just somebody off in the distance. Yeah. These are our neighbors. Yeah.
And for us to succeed as a community, as a state, as a country, people have to succeed. We have to succeed, right. But everybody else does. And when everybody succeeds together, it's a beautiful thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. And I just want to follow up on Deb's comment about the exhibition of art that she mentioned. That's actually on view at the Mark Twain House and Museum.
Till the end of December. So make sure you get there.
So if you're able to get there, please do. And I was telling Deb before the program began, I stop into the gallery every time I can and just find something new to relish every time. It's super impressive.
Dr. Miller, Jennifer has promised that she's going to give you a virtual tour of the exhibit, right, Jennifer? Didn't we talk about that?
Yes, we did.
How about that?
Absolutely. Let's arrange that after you. You would love it, and that would be an honor too.
Yeah.
So Jan wants to know: do most prisons offer educational opportunities such as GED or 2-year associate's degrees or similar programs?
It's not a hard question. The answer is most prisons offer not enough of the programs to meet the needs of the people who are inside. So just to hit you with one stat. So on the one hand, that's the educational stat. So I want to hit you with a different stat that has to do with treatment to put the education stat into some relief so we understand like why I'm saying this and what it is. So there's a scholar, Faye Taxman, who does brilliant work. But one of the things that she did was she studied the capacity of prisons to meet the needs that they require of the people who they incarcerate. So she said, let me count. Let me look and count and see of all the people who are mandated to do substance abuse treatment. So this is equally important, but much lower level than say access to a college program. Like that, the order of priorities are probably going to be substance abuse treatment first, and then educational opportunities. Just the way that the country thinks about the people inside. For that reason. Okay. In prison, we have the ability to meet the needs of 25% of the people we order to do substance abuse treatment in order to get out of prison. We can meet 25% of the need. That's how little we have. We have 1/4 of what we need. And similarly, for folks who want to get GEDs, for people who want to do college, many prisons, perhaps even most, offer some sort of programming in that vein. What I found when I started this work as a volunteer chaplain at the Cook County Jail. Jail is not prison, but that's where I started to work. And what I found was that people had to choose: would they go to chapel service or would they do their GED class?
Right.
And this is what we're up against. We're up against a group that we don't want to help because we don't think that they're fully human participants in our human communities. Why this idea of thinking about them as human beings first, who are locked away, but they are human beings, really does matter. When we think about the budgets that we appropriate, when we think about the kinds of programs that we allow inside, most programs in most prisons end up being religious programs and not educational or these other sorts of things. Religious.
How about requiring GED?
How about that? Requiring it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
For anybody that's serving, over 2 years. So they're coming out with a GED. They're coming out with that educational piece.
I think that statistic that you just shared, or those statistics, should be more widely known because I think that a lot of us kind of assuage our, I don't know, guilt might not be the right word, but we're like, okay, well, they're in prison, but they have access to opportunities to better themselves. And to know that that is not, in fact, the case is really eye-opening and, to me, shocking. And so I'm so grateful that you shared that.
I'm glad.
So Dr. Miller, do we have other questions, Jennifer?
I don't think we have any other audience questions.
Okay.
I'm just going to double check and make sure I'm not missing anything. So,
Yeah.
No.
So one of the other pieces that I think is powerful when you talk about that is the statistics that you gave on plea bargains.
Yeah.
Right? And, people aren't making the decision how long they're going to prison, right?
That's right. 95%.
95%.
Yeah, are settled through a plea deal, which is, not a trial, it is an agreement. The criminal justice system. I mean, my position is that the criminal justice system doesn't really look for truth. I mean, it really resolves cases. 95 at a rate of 95%, right? Like it's resolving a case.
Yeah.
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 So, Dr. Miller, one last question is: we have an audience. I don't know how many we have out there, Jennifer, but I know we have a lot.
Yeah.
So people read your book, right? And they feel compelled to do something. Mm-hmm. What is that something in your mind that this audience could do to really make a difference?
I think one place to start. I think there are many things that one can do. So what I often say is you start from your place of influence, whatever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a landlord renting apartments to people who have records, not just, a broad-based ban on it, really considering who it is you're letting in, these kinds of questions. If you're an employer hiring people with records, wherever your place of influence is,
Mm-hmm.
That's the place you exert it. If you're a writer writing stories, this really does matter. But in addition to this, local politics really, 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 really matters. The devil is always in the details, and the details are always hashed out at the local level. So remember, we talked about, for example, the well-meaning Adoption and Safe Families Act, which set a 15-month guideline. Well, that's a 15-month guideline at the federal level. That doesn't mean that's what happens in New Orleans, Louisiana, where it's probably more like 6 months. You see, and so the DA, who the DA is, really matters. These judges you vote for really, really matters. These are the kind of guys that are giving out, triple life sentences. What is giving someone 150 years in prison do? Like what anyway. So the judges really matter, but so too do the politicians at the very local level. So in cities, things like aldermen, commissioners, folks over different wards, that really matters. People who are appointed in particular kinds of offices. So the mayor absolutely matters. And so thinking carefully about politics at the local level is really important to address this question, because a city can make decisions that even the state or a town, can make decisions about how folks are treated in their town, even if the country isn't necessarily yet on board. I'll give you an example of a giant city. The state of New York has something called the Human Rights Commission that sues people. The city of New York that sues people if they discriminate against people with criminal records for work, and that criminal record doesn't have anything to do with the job itself. So if it's just I'm not hiring you because you're a felon, they have to, it triggers an audit. And anyway, well, as a result, New York is not perfectly, but people with records in New York, lots of them get jobs, and they tend to have better outcomes in other cities that I've seen, for example.
Right.
And that's a result of local politics. That's a giant city. Imagine what you can do in a much smaller, in a smaller place. So local politics absolutely matters. The main thing that matters, though, I think, is a commitment to hospitality and belonging. This is the challenge of the book for me. I mean, this is the challenge that folks like Ronald Simpson Bay in the book, raise for us. Can we make a world where we make a place for people even when they've caused us harm? That's the question. That's the question. What do I do when I'm afraid? That's, for me, the measure of my ethics. When I'm scared, what do I do?
Right.
Whether I get over my racism or not, whether I get over my patriarchy or not, whether I get over how I feel about the LGBTQ community or not, whatever my prejudices are, how do I act when I take account of them? How do I act? That's the question for me.
And self-accountability. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every so often I get to host an evening such as this where my life is altered, and I have learned so much. I'm so grateful to both of you for sharing your thoughts and your experience and your research and information with us tonight. I think I speak for the entire audience in saying that this has just been so enlightening and in its strange way uplifting, I have to say.
Yeah.
Right. So thank you both so much.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. Really, thank you for your book, and the audible of your book is phenomenal as well. Right?
But don't buy that, because you need to buy a copy from.
Well, absolutely. You have to have both, because you have to have the signed copy, which I'm going to have to buy it from you because I don't have a signed copy.
Well, that's right. So yes, please follow the link in the chat to do that. If you didn't want to buy the book before, I can't imagine that you don't want to now. And I just want to thank Community Partners in Action and Deb as their representative, and our neighbors across the lawn at the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center for co-sponsoring this evening. And please visit us at marktwainhouse.org to see a list of all of our upcoming virtual programs. We have so much. Jacques has just posted that we have Matt Taibbi of Rolling Stone with Benjamin Grippo next week talking about the business secrets of drug dealing, which promises to be an incredible evening just like this. And we also have a couple of live programs in person coming up on November 30th. We have Mark Twain's birthday lecture featuring our lovely, wonderful trustee, David Badachi. And on December 1st, the next night, we have our Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award Ceremony, where we're awarding Stephen Graham Jones the Mark Twain American Voice in Literature Award for his book, The Only Good Indians. So please check those things out. I say that all by way of saying this is one of the highlights of our calendar, but it's not the only thing we offer. And Deb and Dr. Miller, thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. I'm so grateful. And thank you to the audience for your great questions and for your donations. We appreciate them very, very much.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a wonderful, I had a wonderful time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Miller. Very nice to meet you.
Very
Honored.
Nice. Same. Thank you.
Come see us again in person when you can.
Thanks, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody that listened.
Bye.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.